next we have Movie Spotlight, our Friday feature reviewing some of the latest cinematic releases at the Korean box office and online and beyond. And we do that with the help of our panel of film critics. This week we have Jason Bechervaise, who is flying solo again. Jason, hello. Yes. It's great to see you.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here. Thank you, Jeonju, for having me as always.
Yes, I know you are back after visiting Jeonju for the film festival. We'll get to that today. But first, I know there was a film that you wanted to review. It's a Korean release that's been in cinemas since last week, and it's the sports comedy drama Dream, featuring Park Seo-joon and IU.
That's right.
It has the same name in Korean, Dream. And Jason, this is from the director of Extreme Job as well, 극한
Yeah, that's right. So this is Lee Byung-heon, not the actor. He helmed 2 hits, Extreme Job and 20. He also made What a Man Wants in 2018 and the indie film Cheer Up Mr. Lee. He's actually one of the rare cases of an independent filmmaker or makes his debut in the independent industry. He's able to make this very successful transition into the commercial sector in the 2010s. Now, this is as the studios were consolidating their presence, and it's just really hard to find a voice as a young filmmaker. Certainly not in the same way as the filmmakers that emerged in the 90s and 2000s. And directly he has a very unique style. He blends slapstick and dry humor, and Korean comedies are largely associated with the former, a lot of slapstick humor that you see in television. And something that I've noticed about him is that how he's able to bring it together. And so Dream is essentially much the same, but it is more ambitious. It's a sports film of 2 halves, with the first essentially setting the stage for the second half. And the first half, ironically, is actually the better of the two, as this is where the characters are introduced. And so Park Seo-joon plays this very famous, well-established football player in the K-League, but he's disciplined owing to his behaviour on and off the pitch. He's involved in a scandal, and his fall from grace leads him to basically take charge of this football team, basically homeless people who come together, and you have these kind of backstories that are kind of followed by this producer played by IU, and they end up going to Budapest in Hungary to perform in this World Cup, where they come up against teams including Germany, and so it also stars Ko Jang-seok, Jeon Sung-gil, Lee Hyun-woo, and Yan Hyun-min.
Yes, so the Homeless World Cup, it is based on a real event as well. So this release, it's interesting because it follows on the heels of another sports film that we reviewed a few weeks ago, Rebound.
Yeah.
That was, of course, about basketball, and we reviewed it quite positively here, if I remember correctly. But it sounds like from your tone and your expression already that you're not as enthusiastic about Dream. Is that right?
I'm not. The reaction was actually quite lukewarm. And so I went in with kind of, tepid expectations. And I've not actually been a huge fan of his other films, but, I went in and watched the first half and I was like, actually, this film is quite good. Wondering, sure, it's formulaic, but, I think IU is terrific. And, this use of kind of dry humor that you don't often see in Korean films, the sarcasm. And I really enjoyed that. And then the second half of the film, it just comes off the rails because this is part of the film that's set in Hungary, and it's it's a lot more ambitious. It's reliant on non-Korean actors. It gets very sloppy. You've got this commentator who just drives me crazy, and it gets very nationalistic towards the end. And so it's just really contrived, and just reliant on these conventions that we've seen before. And it just loses a lot of steam. It just feels incredibly forced. If we go back to Rebounds, and Darcy mentioned in our review that it didn't feel all that forced. All for the better, And
right.
Here it gets really cringy towards the end, and it's a real shame because the build up actually is really good. And yes, we've seen it all before. We've seen all these characters, these misfits. Can they really perform together and all the rest of it? There have been a number of Korean films that have that tackle that same theme. Take Off, for example,
Sure.
Gokga. It's all familiar territory. But But the writing was actually quite good. But then the second half of the film, it just made me very frustrated. Yeah,
It's strange. It's normally the second half of a sports film which gets people going.
Well, that's what I said.
The underdog sports story at a
Sure.
competition.
Well, this is what I mean when I said, it's ironic because, the first half of the film, you expect that to kind of be a bit sluggish, sure, we're getting to know the characters. And Korean films, people often ask me, how are Korean films different compared to Hollywood films? And I think one of the big differences is that characters are developed over a longer period in a film. So, sometimes it will take 20 minutes, 30 minutes, even longer to develop the characters. In a Hollywood film, you wouldn't get that.
Right.
It's a lot kind of pacier, whereas Korean films tend to be a bit more melodramatic. But yeah, it works in the first half of the film. Less effective in the second.
Okay, but still, you said you enjoyed IU's performance.
Yeah, she's great. She's absolutely fantastic. I think she's emerging as one of the the great performers on screen of her generation. She's been very, very selective in the projects she's chosen. Of course, she's acted in TV dramas, but when it comes to the silver screen, she's been a lot more selective. And someone of that that profile, you'd expect. I'm sure she's been given various projects over the years that she's turned down. And she was in Broker, and she was in a collection of short films called Persona. She's great in those films. Very kind of somber, almost intense performances. But here it's quite different. We get to see the kind of the comedic side of her, and she channels much of the film's, comedy, and she does it really, really effectively. And I want to see more of her. But one of the problems of the film, actually, she's left at the fringes. She's left on the sidelines, and so she's not really. She doesn't really take center stage. It's the football team that takes center stage. Which, sure, you can understand that, but actually, she's the best thing in it. So it's a shame.
Right, so that seems to be a summary of your review. It's just a bit of a shame, this film, unfortunately.
It is. I think, it's just so often, with these directors, they get a little bit more ambitious and it just doesn't work in the same way that it had done in their previous films.
Okay, so that was Dream. Let's turn now to the Jeonju International Film Festival, which I mentioned at the start. It kicked off just over a week ago now, and it wraps up tomorrow. Now, this year, the 24th edition featured 247 films from 42 countries and opened with the Dardenne brothers' immigration thriller Tori and Lokita that premiered at Cannes last year in competition. Jason, as we said, you were down there. How was the atmosphere this year? How did it compare to previous years?
Yeah, it was interesting because I was there last year, which was like the first event, kind of the first proper film festival in 2-3 years. And it felt like a celebration of the industry. There was a lot of optimism. Of course, just a few weeks later, Bomdae-doshi 2, the roundup, sold over 10 million tickets. And so, yeah, I think it was a jubilant atmosphere last year. I mean, I think you could say the same was true this year, although certainly to a less extent. There seemed to be fewer industry people down there this year. I'm not sure where that is, and that's just purely anecdotal. I don't have any figures to back that up. But just the overall feeling, the screens themselves. I went to see several films that they were quite, I wouldn't say they were like completely full, but they certainly were, mostly full. And yeah, it was good to be down there. Jeonju's so full of culture and local cuisine, and I always have a good time down in Jeonju. And last weekend was certainly no exception to that. Saw some good films, yeah. So overall, a good year, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, Jeonju, it's not as big as, say, the Busan International Film Festival, but what it lacks in size, it definitely makes up for in charm. That's why I hear from many people. It's a festival that features more independent and experimental films.
Yeah.
I'm sure you saw a lot, as you mentioned, mainly Korean ones, though, right? What caught your eye?
That's right. So, I'm a big fan of Korean cinema, so that's what I go down to see.
Sure.
And so I normally prioritize the Korean competition films and also the cinema projects. So they were, in terms of the projects this year, this is The President and Breath. In terms of the Korean competition films, I saw Heavy Snow. I've seen a few of the competition films, not all of them. I'm working through them literally as I speak. And Heavy Snow, I was very impressed with. It stars Han So-hee, of course, this major star in Korea. She plays an actress who has a relationship with another actor. It's a lesbian drama with a focus on mental health and depression. And it's not really articulated, it's shown, which is really hard to do. And so I was really impressed with that film. It's directed by Yoon Soo-ik. And there was also Pak Marisol's documentary Warm Welcome, which deals with asylum seekers. The director's mother, she works as someone who's trying to help these asylum seekers, often with little or no money, doing so, and helping them with appeals and so on and so forth. And I think it works really well. It's quite a personal documentary, but it's well structured, and certainly I quite like that film. I saw The Breath, Jerry Yoon's film, which was incredibly intense. It deals with death and the filmmaker's passing of his mother rather. So
right.
Yeah, it's it was a good year, I think. And overall, actually, I would say the tone of the films this year was quite interesting. What I noticed last year as well, because quite often independent films can be quite down, quite depressing. Talked about that on this show quite a lot.
Especially Korean independent films,
sure.
it seems. And
so you can come out just feeling, wow, that was an incredible piece of work. But my goodness, I'm feeling rather depressed, dealing with, the difficulties facing young people especially. But I'm finding a change in tone. I think films, even though, they're tackling some difficult problems, issues, actually I find them a little bit more enjoyable or even more accessible. So certainly noticeably less grim. I noticed that last year with films such as Archaeology of Love and Mother and Daughter. And even this year, there's a film I wrote a piece recently on North Korean defectors in Korean films, and
right.
You see them in commercial films, independent films. And often the independent films are really, really tough to watch because they're really grim, and you see the difficulties faced in North Korean defectors. And a tour guide played by Kwak Eun-mi again hones in on North Korean defectors, but it just feels a little bit less depressing, and that they inject it with little bit of humour here and there, and perhaps we're living in a less depressing society, or maybe it's just that directors are trying to tackle it in different ways.
Right.
Maybe a bit of both.
It's an interesting trend. So, why do you think they are becoming, should we say, more optimistic in a way?
Yeah, no, absolutely optimistic. We actually even see this in Hong Sang-soo's films. Actually, he's an independent filmmaker, and I find that his films actually have more optimism compared to some of his earlier films. I guess you go through different styles and different themes, and I think naturally we're now in the 2020s, and films are looking a little bit different, and they're feeling a bit different, and we're coming out of the pandemic, and perhaps there is a sense of optimism out there. But even, certainly during the middle of the pandemic, they were pretty depressing, and films certainly dealing with coronavirus. But I think it's a welcome change. I find them, more accessible, and certainly as someone who has to watch, a dozen films at a festival, and if they're all really dour, you can come out wanting to need a drink. So, I welcome that. And actually, I think, overall the quality is really, really decent, really quite good. So all encouraging.
Yeah, maybe after the dour few years we've had in real life,
right?
People are looking for more of a positive escape now. Perhaps we are on that upward cycle. Interesting. Okay. That's where we're going to have to end it today. Jason, thank you for your reviews. As always, have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time.
You too. Happy holiday weekend.